The autumn wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of change. Ezra Blackwood stood at the edge of his sprawling estate, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson. At 55, Ezra was a man who had it all, or so the world believed. His salt and pepper hair rustled in the breeze, and his steel-gray eyes held a weariness that belied his outward success. For 30 years, Ezra had built an empire. Blackwood Industries was a household name, its tendrils reaching into every aspect of modern life. From cutting-edge technology to sustainable energy solutions, Ezra's vision had shaped the world. His net worth was estimated in the billions, a fortune that grew with each passing day. Yet, as he stood there, the weight of his wealth felt like shackles around his ankles. Inside the mansion, the sound of laughter drifted through open windows. Ezra's family was gathering for their annual reunion, a tradition he had once cherished but now dreaded. His wife, Cordelia, would be arranging flowers in the grand foyer, her perfectionism evident in every petal's placement. Their children, Liam and Aria, would be trading barbs in the living room, their sibling rivalry having only intensified with age. Ezra sighed, his breath visible in the cooling air. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against the envelope that held his fate. With measured steps, he turned and walked back towards the house, each footfall bringing him closer to a decision that would change everything. The reunion unfolded as it always did. Cordelia, resplendent in a designer gown, played the perfect hostess. At 48, she was still strikingly beautiful, her auburn hair elegantly coiffed, her green eyes sharp and observant. She moved among the guests, a mix of family, friends, and influential acquaintances, with practiced ease. Liam, at 28, was the spitting image of a young Ezra. Ambitious and driven, he had already carved out a name for himself in the tech world, though his methods often skirted ethical boundaries. He stood by the bar, regaling a group of wide-eyed listeners with tales of his latest venture. Aria, 3 years younger than Liam, watched her brother with thinly veiled contempt. An environmental lawyer, she had dedicated her life to fighting against the very corporations her family's wealth was built upon. Her long, dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her attire modest compared to the opulence around her. As the evening wore on, Ezra found himself increasingly detached from the proceedings. The conversations, once exhilarating, now seemed hollow. The laughter, forced, the adulation, suffocating. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, nodding and smiling when appropriate, all the while feeling the weight of the envelope in his pocket. It was near midnight when Ezra finally called for everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the man they revered as a visionary, a philanthropist, a pillar of society. Cordelia moved to stand beside him, her hand instinctively seeking his. For a moment, Ezra allowed himself to savor her touch, knowing it might be the last time. "Friends, family," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I have an announcement to make." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering on the faces of his children. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Blackwood Industries." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Cordelia's grip on his hand tightened, her nails digging into his palm. Liam stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and concern. Aria remained where she was, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Furthermore," Ezra continued, his resolve strengthening with each word, "I have decided to divest myself of my entire fortune. Every penny, every asset will be liquidated and donated to various charitable causes around the world." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, as if a dam had burst, the room erupted into chaos. Questions flew at Ezra from all directions. Cordelia released his hand, stumbling backward as if physically struck. Liam's face contorted with rage, while Aria stood frozen, her expression unreadable. Ezra raised his hands, calling for calm. "I understand this comes as a shock, but my decision is final. The details are all here." He produced the envelope, handing it to a stunned Cordelia. Everything you need to know is inside. I'm sorry, but this is goodbye." With those words, Ezra Blackwood turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the night. Behind him, he left a legacy in tatters and a family in turmoil. Ahead of him lay an uncertain future, but for the first time in years, he felt truly free. The days that followed Ezra's disappearance were a whirlwind of media frenzy and legal battles. Cordelia, shell-shocked and humiliated, retreated from public life. Liam, fueled by anger and a sense of betrayal, launched a desperate bid to salvage what he could of the family's fortune. Arya, torn between her principles and her love for her father, found herself caught in the middle of the storm. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the world slowly forgot about Ezra Blackwood. His fortune, true to his word, was distributed to charities across the globe. Blackwood Industries, once a titan of industry, was dismantled and sold off piece by piece. The mansion, a symbol of their former glory, stood empty and neglected. Cordelia, unable to bear the constant reminders of her past life, eventually moved to a small coastal town. She found solace in painting, her canvases filled with stormy seas and lonely lighthouses. The bitterness that had initially consumed her gradually gave way to a quiet acceptance, though the question of why Ezra had abandoned them never left her mind. Liam's fall from grace was spectacular and swift. Without his father's connections and resources, his questionable business practices soon caught up with him. He faced a series of lawsuits and criminal charges, his reputation in tatters. Rock bottom came in the form of a 5-year prison sentence for fraud. Behind bars, Liam was forced to confront the man he had become and the values he had compromised in his pursuit of wealth and power. Arya, ironically, found herself thrust into the spotlight she had always shunned. As the only Blackwood seemingly untainted by scandal, she became the face of various environmental initiatives funded by her father's donations. The guilt she felt for benefiting from the very system she had fought against was tempered by the real change she was able to effect. Yet, in quiet moments, she couldn't help but wonder about her father's whereabouts and his true motivations. 5 years passed, then 10. The world moved on, new scandals and sensations capturing the public's attention. The name Blackwood faded into obscurity, becoming little more than a cautionary tale in business schools and a footnote in history books. It was on a crisp autumn day, mirroring the one a decade earlier, that Ezra Blackwood resurfaced. He appeared not with a bang, but with a whisper, a letter delivered to each of his family members, requesting a meeting at the old family estate. Cordelia received hers as she prepared for a local art exhibition. Her hands trembled as she read the familiar handwriting, a mix of emotions, anger, longing, curiosity, washing over her. She canceled her plans without a second thought. Liam's letter arrived at the halfway house where he was completing his transition back into society. The years in prison had changed him, stripping away the arrogance and leaving behind a man struggling to redefine himself. He stared at the letter for hours, torn between the desire to confront his father and the fear of reopening old wounds. Arya was in the midst of a press conference when her assistant handed her the envelope. She faltered mid-speech, recognizing instantly what it meant. Excusing herself, she retreated to her office, her mind racing with questions she had long thought would remain unanswered. On the appointed day, the three of them converged on the estate. The once manicured grounds were now overgrown, nature reclaiming what had once been a symbol of man's dominion. They entered the house in silence, the air thick with dust and memories. Ezra was waiting for them in the library, the room that had once been his sanctuary. Time had weathered him, his hair now completely white, his face lined with age and experience. But his eyes, those steel-gray orbs, still held the same intensity they remembered. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "I owe you all an explanation." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Cordelia stepped forward, her voice quivering with emotion. 10 years, Ezra. 10 years without a word. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? Ezra nodded, accepting her anger. I do, and I'm sorry. More sorry than you can imagine. But I had to do it. I had to find the truth." "The truth?" Liam scoffed, his old bitterness rising to the surface. What truth could possibly justify destroying everything we had? Arya remained silent, her eyes fixed on her father, studying him intently. Ezra took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to reveal. The truth about our family's legacy, about the real source of our wealth. He paused, his gaze moving from one family member to another. Everything we had, every penny, every accolade, was built on a lie. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Cordelia sank into a nearby chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Liam's face drained of color, while Arya leaned against a bookshelf, her suspicions confirmed. "It started with my father," Ezra continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "He wasn't the self-made man we all believed him to be. His initial fortune came from exploiting war-torn countries, profiteering from the misery of others. When I took over the company, I told myself I would do things differently, that I would use our resources for good. But the taint was always there, hidden beneath the surface." He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the overgrown gardens. "For years, I tried to outrun our past, to build something I could be proud of. But the more successful we became, the more I realized we were just perpetuating a cycle of exploitation. Our clean energy initiatives were displacing indigenous communities. Our technological advancements were widening the gap between the rich and the poor. We were solving problems by creating new ones." Turning back to face his family, Ezra's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I couldn't live with it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that our wealth justified the harm we were causing. So I made a choice. I decided to dismantle everything and start over, to find a way to truly make amends." The room fell silent as the family absorbed Ezra's words. Cordelia was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where have you been all this time?" A sad smile played on Ezra's lips. "Everywhere and nowhere. I've spent the past decade traveling the world, seeing firsthand the impact of our actions, both good and bad. I've worked in refugee camps, helped rebuild communities devastated by natural disasters, taught in schools that had never seen a computer before. I've lived among the people we once viewed only as statistics on a balance sheet." Liam, his earlier anger now replaced by a mix of shame and curiosity, asked, "And what did you learn?" "I learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents," Ezra replied. "It's measured in the lives we touch, the positive change we create. I learned that it's never too late to right our wrongs, to redefine our legacy." Arya, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. "Why come back now? Why tell us all this?" Ezra's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "Because it's time for the final stage of my journey. I'm dying." He held up a hand to forestall their reactions. "Cancer, inoperable. I have a few months at most, and I needed, to see you all one last time, to ask for your forgiveness, yes, but more importantly, to offer you a choice." He reached into his pocket and produced 3 envelopes, similar to the one he had left behind a decade ago. "In these, you'll find the details of what I've been working on, a new foundation, built from the ground up, with a mission to address the root causes of global inequality and environmental degradation. It's not about throwing money at problems, but about creating sustainable solutions, empowering communities, and fostering real change." Ezra held out the envelopes. "I'm offering each of you a place in this new venture, a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves, to redefine what the Blackwood name means. But I want to be clear, this isn't about reclaiming our former status or wealth. It's about hard work, sacrifice, and a commitment to making a genuine difference in the world." The family stood frozen, the weight of Ezra's words and the choice before them hanging heavy in the air. Cordelia's eyes brimmed with tears, a lifetime of emotions, love, anger, betrayal, hope, warring within her. Liam's hands shook as he reached for an envelope, his mind racing with the possibilities of redemption. Arya, always the most intuitive of the 3, saw in her father's eyes the peace he had finally found, and felt a glimmer of that same peace within herself. As the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows through the library windows, the Blackwood family stood at a crossroads. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and the weight of their complicated history. But for the first time in a decade, they faced it together. Ezra watched as his family grappled with his revelation and offer. The silence stretched on, each of them lost in their own thoughts and internal struggles. Finally, it was Arya who broke the stillness. "I'm in," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She stepped forward and took one of the envelopes from her father's hand. This is what I've been fighting for all along, a chance to make real, systemic change." Liam looked at his sister, a mix of admiration and uncertainty in his eyes. I don't know if I'm cut out for this," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "After everything I've done." Ezra placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "The fact that you recognize your past mistakes is the first step towards redemption, Liam. We've all made choices we regret. What matters is what we do moving forward." Slowly, hesitantly, Liam reached out and took an envelope. "I want to try," he said softly. "I want to be better." All eyes turned to Cordelia. She stood, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on Ezra. "You left us," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You left me, without a word, without an explanation. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Ezra's face crumpled with guilt and regret. "Cordelia, She held up a hand, silencing him. "Let me finish. You left, and it broke me. But it also forced me to find myself again, to rediscover who I was beyond being Ezra Blackwood's wife." She took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I can forgive you, not yet. But I understand why you did it, and I want to be part of this new chapter." With that, she took the final envelope. Ezra looked at his family, battered and bruised by the past, but standing together once more. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know this won't be easy. We have a lot of work to do, not just out there in the world, but here, between us. But I believe in you, in all of you." As the day faded into twilight, the Blackwoods began to talk. Really talk, for the first time in years. They shared their pain, their fears, their hopes for the future. Ezra told them more about his experiences over the past decade, the people he'd met, the lives he'd touched, the perspective he'd gained. Cordelia spoke of her journey of self-discovery through art. Liam opened up about his time in prison and the hard lessons he'd learned. Arya shared her frustrations and triumphs in the world of environmental advocacy. Hours passed, and as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, a tentative plan began to take shape. The new Blackwood Foundation would focus on 3 main areas: environmental restoration, education in underserved communities, and ethical technology development. Each family member would take on a role that played to their strengths. Arya would lead the environmental initiatives, leveraging her legal expertise and passion for conservation. Liam, with his tech background, would spearhead the development of ethical technologies aimed at bridging the digital divide. Cordelia, drawing on her newfound artistic sensibilities, would oversee educational programs that integrated creativity and practical skills. As for Ezra, he would serve as an advisor, sharing his experiences and connections while he still could. The weight of his impending mortality hung over them all, lending a sense of urgency to their plans. Over the next few months, the Blackwood family threw themselves into their new mission. The old mansion was transformed into the headquarters of the Blackwood Foundation, its opulent rooms repurposed for meetings, workshops, and planning sessions. The overgrown gardens were cleared and replanted with native species, becoming a living laboratory for sustainable agriculture techniques. Word of the Blackwoods' return and their ambitious new venture spread quickly. At first, the public reaction was skeptical, many viewing it as a desperate attempt at image rehabilitation. But as the Foundation's projects began to take shape and yield results, perceptions started to shift. Arya spearheaded a series of innovative environmental restoration projects, focusing on areas that had been devastated by industrial pollution, including some caused by the old Blackwood industries. She worked tirelessly, often getting her hands dirty alongside local volunteers, replanting forests and cleaning up waterways. Her genuine passion and hands-on approach gradually won over even her harshest critics. Liam, humbled by his experiences and determined to make amends, dove into the world of ethical technology. He assembled a team of brilliant but often overlooked developers from underprivileged backgrounds, challenging them to create solutions that would empower rather than exploit communities. Their first major project, a decentralized, low-cost internet infrastructure for remote areas, began to garner attention from tech circles and humanitarian organizations alike. Cordelia found her calling in education. She traveled to some of the most underserved schools around the world, implementing programs that combined traditional academics with arts and vocational training. Her approach, which emphasized creativity and practical skills, began to show promising results in student engagement and achievement. As the Foundation's work progressed, the dynamics within the Blackwood family continued to evolve. Old wounds began to heal, albeit slowly. Cordelia and Ezra, once estranged, found a new kind of partnership in their shared mission. While romantic reconciliation remained off the table, they developed a deep respect and affection for each other's newfound purpose. Liam and Arya, whose relationship had always been strained by competition and ideological differences, discovered common ground in their commitment to positive change. They started to collaborate on projects that combined their respective expertise, their sibling rivalry transforming into a powerful synergy. Ezra, true to his word, took a background role. He advised when asked, but largely let his family take the lead. As his health declined, he found peace in watching his children and ex-wife flourish in their new roles. The guilt that had driven him for so long began to ease, replaced by a quiet pride in the legacy they were building together. But life, as the Blackwoods had learned, rarely follows a smooth path. As the Foundation's influence grew, so did the challenges it faced. Powerful interests, threatened by the Blackwoods' push for systemic change, began to push back. Corporate lobbyists attempted to block their environmental initiatives. Traditionalists in the education sector resisted Cordelia's innovative programs. Tech giants tried to undermine Liam's efforts to democratize digital access. The family found themselves fighting battles on multiple fronts, their resources stretched thin. The stress began to take its toll, old insecurities and tensions threatening to resurface. Liam, still haunted by his past mistakes, struggled with self-doubt when faced with setbacks. Arya's perfectionism drove her to work to the point of exhaustion. Cordelia, confronted with bureaucratic resistance, felt the temptation to retreat back into her solitary world of art. It was during this time of crisis that Ezra's health took a sharp decline. Confined to a hospital bed, he called his family to his side. As they gathered around him, tired and disheartened, Ezra spoke with a clarity and strength that belied his frail physical state. "Look at you," he said, his eyes shining with pride and love. "Look at what you've accomplished in such a short time. Yes, we're facing opposition. Yes, there are setbacks, but that's how you know you're making a real difference. The old system doesn't give up without a fight." He reached out, grasping each of their hands in turn. "Remember why we started this. Not for acclaim, not for wealth, but because it's the right thing to do. The path of true change is never easy, but it's always worth it." Ezra's words acted as a balm to their weary spirits, reminding them of the bigger picture. As they left the hospital that day, there was a renewed determination in their steps. They began to adapt their strategies, learning from their setbacks and finding new ways to advance their cause. Arya realized that to create lasting environmental change, she needed to work within the system as well as outside it. She began engaging with policymakers, using her legal background to draft legislation that would protect vulnerable ecosystems and promote sustainable practices. Liam, drawing on the humility he'd learned during his downfall, reached out to form partnerships with established tech companies. By collaborating rather than competing, he found ways to scale up his ethical technology initiatives, creating a ripple effect throughout the industry. Cordelia, faced with resistance from traditional educational institutions, pivoted to focus on community-based learning centers. These flexible, adaptable programs quickly gained traction in areas underserved by conventional schools, demonstrating the power of her creative approach to education. As the months passed, the Blackwood Foundation's impact continued to grow. Stories began to emerge of revitalized ecosystems, of underprivileged students discovering their potential, of communities empowered by accessible technology. Gradually, public perception shifted. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with corporate greed, began to represent hope and positive change. Ezra, against all odds, held on. Though his body weakened, his spirit seemed to strengthen with each passing day. He soaked in the reports of the Foundation's progress like a plant turning towards the sun. In lucid moments, he would offer insights and encouragement, his vast experience providing valuable perspective. It was a year to the day after their reunion at the old mansion, when Ezra called his family together one last time. The hospital room was bright with sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring through the open window. "I want you to know," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that you've given me more than I could have ever hoped for. You've taken our family's legacy and transformed it into something beautiful, something meaningful." Tears flowed freely as Cordelia, Liam, and Arya gathered close, each holding onto a part of Ezra. There was so much to say, yet in that moment, words seemed inadequate. They simply held on, their shared love and purpose flowing between them like an electric current. "Keep going," Ezra murmured, his eyes drifting closed. "Keep fighting for what's right. Keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep believing in each other." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues reminiscent of that fateful autumn day over a decade ago, Ezra Blackwood took his last breath. But unlike his first disappearance, this time he left behind not chaos and confusion, but a family united in purpose, a foundation poised to make real and lasting change, and a legacy redeemed. In the days that followed, as news of Ezra's passing spread, something unexpected happened. People from all walks of life, from remote villages to bustling cities, from the halls of power to grassroots organizations, began to share stories of how the Blackwood Foundation had touched their lives. It was as if Ezra's death had sparked a collective reflection on the power of transformation and the potential for redemption. Cordelia, Liam, and Arya found themselves at the center of a movement that was larger than themselves, larger even than the foundation they had built. They realized that Ezra's true gift to them wasn't just the opportunity for redemption, but the chance to inspire others to believe in the possibility of change. As they stood together at Ezra's memorial service, watching as people from around the world joined in a global live stream to pay their respects, the three of them felt a profound sense of purpose. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but they would face them together, bound by love, united by a shared vision, and driven by the knowledge that one family's transformation could spark a global revolution of compassion and conscience. In his final confession, Ezra Blackwood had not just revealed the truth about their past. He had given them the key to a future where wealth was measured not in dollars, but in lives improved, environments restored, and hope rekindled. And in doing so, he had ensured that the Blackwood name would be remembered not for what they had possessed, but for what they had given away. Their fortune, their time, and ultimately their hearts to a world in desperate need of change.